Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about fixing the structures of Japanese in our minds. I talked in our last lesson about the idea of minimizing study because we don't want to spend all our time in meta-Japanese activities like study. You don't learn Japanese from study, you only prepare to learn Japanese from study. Studying Japanese is not learning Japanese any more than buying ropes and pitons is climbing a mountain, but we do need the equipment in order to get started. This is true particularly at the beginning, when we need to get certain basic equipment not only into our hands, but to train ourselves to be able to use them quickly and efficiently. Now there's a shortage of material that can help us do this because essentially all the existing material is based around the conventional Eihongo, so-called Japanese grammar, the conventional Japanese grammar that is so misleading and causes so much difficulty. So I'm going to talk about something that will help us to fix the basic structures of Japanese in our mind, and this is particularly useful for those who are in the early stages of learning, but I think it's also going to be very interesting for people who are at later stages, because in order to look at this and use it successfully, we have to look carefully at the ways in which the conventional Eihongo Japanese grammar models differ from the real structure of the language, and that in itself gives everybody a much better grasp of everything. So, what I'm going to talk about today is an application that, in its own words, drills conjugation. Now, of course, we have to start from the very beginning and question this term conjugation. What does conjugation actually mean? It can mean a variety of things, but I discourage the use of the word because it is closely associated with European grammatical functions that don't exist in Japanese. However, the sense in which conjugation is being used in this particular application is the modulation of words. Now, what do we mean by that? In Japanese, there are two kinds of words. They're called hyogen and taigen. And these are words that modulate and words that don't. Now, as I've explained before, there are very few kinds of words in Japanese if you drop the European model. There are only 3 kinds of words that modulate, and they are the 3 kinds of words that can make up the engine of a sentence, that is to say, verbs, adjectives, and the copula. There are only 3 engines in Japanese, as you know: the verb engine, the adjective engine, and the noun plus copula engine. And all of these can change their form grammatically, and they are the only words in Japanese that can. Verbs and adjectives can only change one thing, and that is the very last kana of the word. That's the only thing that ever modulates in either a verb or an adjective. They can drop the last kana, or they can replace it with a different kana. That's all they can do. Except for the te form and the ta form, which is slightly different, but still only affects the very end of verbs and adjectives. And in the case of verbs, having changed or dropped, in the case of ichidan verbs, that one kana at the end, we can then add all kinds of things. But these are not modifications of the verb. These are separate, independent words that can be attached to the stems of verbs. Some of them are other verbs, like reru, rareru, the receptive helper, seru, saseru, the causative helper, and so forth. And if you understand that these are simply stems and helpers, it's going to be a great deal easier. Helper adjectives like tai and nai work exactly like any other adjective. Helper verbs like reru, rareru, and seru, saseru work as standard ichidan verbs. So there's a lot less to learn here than Eihongo teaching, and apps like this based on Eihongo teaching would lead you to believe. The copula da has, for example, the past form datta. Nothing else can modulate in any way. Nouns can't modulate. And as we know, nearly all Japanese words are either verbs, adjectives, or nouns. There are a very few other words, such as conjunctions like kara, words like mo and made, and these also are non-modulating words. Only those three can modulate. So, in this case, where we talk about drilling conjugation, what we mean is drilling the modulations that can happen to the three types of word that modulate. Now, let's look at the application I'm talking about. It's called Don's Japanese Conjugation Drill, and I'm going to talk about how we can adapt it to our use. First of all, it has something that's extremely important. The first two checkboxes are plain and polite. That means that if we uncheck polite, we get rid of the desu masu form, which is taught far too early. If you are starting to learn Japanese structure, forget desu masu until you have the plain, straightforward structure of Japanese in your mind. Desu masu is eccentric and irregular and will mislead you on various areas of Japanese. So we uncheck that to begin with. Now, conventional Eihongo Japanese grammar doesn't really recognize the three engines properly, and we'll see there's no place here for the noun plus copular engine. But that doesn't matter, because fortunately, the noun plus copular ending is in fact covered by what they call na adjectives. Na adjectives, as you know, if you see my videos, and I'll put a link above my head for the right video if you haven't, na adjectives are nouns. The fact that they use the na form of da is in fact of no consequence at all here, because the na form of da never changes in any way. So if you check na adjectives, you will in fact be drilling the noun plus copular. And the fact that it restricts itself to adjectival nouns is of no real importance, because there are plenty of them, and what goes for adjectival nouns goes for all nouns as far as the drill is concerned. So na adjectives covers the third engine, noun plus copular. Group 1 verbs and group 2 verbs is simply the way they express Godan verbs and Ichidan verbs respectively, and I'll put a link in the information section below for this application so that you can go and take a look at it as soon as you finish this video. Now, most of the other checkboxes are pretty self-explanatory. You have a great deal of flexibility here, so you can drill what you learn as you learn it. Once you see my video on times, past, present, and future, you can use this to drill the non-past, which is the basic form of verbs, the past, and what they call the progressive. What the progressive is simply the te form plus iru. Desire, as it says. Now, why does it say desire? Desire is in fact drilling the tai helper adjective, but of course, because conventional Eihongo Japanese doesn't understand that the tai adjective is an adjective that acts like any other adjective, but thinks it's a form of verbs, it treats it as a separate matter. But that's fine, because if you check that box, you'll be drilling how to use the tai adjective. And if you remember that it is an adjective, and that it does exactly the same things that other adjectives do, you'll find it a lot easier than the Eihongo students. The passive, of course, refers to the receptive helper verb, leru, lalelu. The useful thing about an app like this is that it allows you to test yourself on these things, drill yourself on these things, and make sure you have it all clear and understandable in your head. You don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but depending on how easy you find it to pick things up, you may want to do it every now and again for some time at the beginning of your learning, or later on to refresh these things. And if you find that you're getting things wrong, go back to the relevant videos. For negative, you go to my video on negatives. For te form, you go to my video on the te form. For past and progressive, you go to my video on verb tenses. For so-called passive, you go to my video on the receptive. For causative, you go to my video on the causative. And for potential, you go to my video on the potential. For desire, which actually means the use of the Thai helper adjective, that works just like any other adjective, I'll link you to the correct video for that one below. If you find at any point that you're getting things wrong in the drills, just go back to those videos, because the drills are based on the idea that these are just random facts that you have to learn. They're not. They're logical structures, so you can get this much more quickly and easily than Hongo learners. There are also some other options, such as the option to use trick questions, in which the answer may be the same as the form of the question. It's worth using these because it makes sure you've got everything straight in your mind. And there's also an option to show furigana at all times. I don't recommend using this unless you're very shaky on basic kanji, because you can hover on the kanji and get the furigana anyway. And the special case called e adjective really only refers to the adjective e, and it's treated as a special case simply because, as I told you in the video about adjectives, whenever we do anything with it or modulate it in any way, it reverts to being yoi. So we don't say ikatta, but yokatta, etc. And if you're at all shaky on that, you can include that as well. You have complete flexibility here to drill whatever it is you want to drill the material learned in a particular lesson, or to go over everything, or to go over any combination you want to. I'm hoping that we can get more materials, and ultimately I'm hoping that we can get materials designed by developers and others who understand the organic approach, so that these can be custom designed for organic learners. In the meantime, this is a very useful application that can be easily customized for organic use. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels, who make these videos possible, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere. Without all of you, none of this would be possible. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. Korekara mo yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Class dismissed.